This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Episkey by Imparfait, composed by Burning Aurora, Caliana, and Flowerhawk. May 1977. Chapter 1, James.
Give me my brother back.
Regulus Black says, "It's a life debt invocation. James knows the consequences if he refuses. His magic will fade, first slowly, then quicker. Eventually, he'll be a squib, but only for a little while, because the refusal will eat at his life force until he falls down stone dead."
Give me my brother back.
He thinks about it, what that means, which he doesn't know. There's things he won't stand. Sirius will not return to Grimold Place. Sirius won't leave his tapestry. His mom and dad love him. They care about his happiness, and they're the parents he deserves. Sirius only just got them. He won't let that be ripped out from under him. Sirius will not leave the life he's built behind. There'll be no betrothal to Violetta Yaxley with a tacit agreement that he can keep Remus on the side. He won't let Sirius give up his dreams of Oxmag and healing and being married to the love of his life. There'll be a house in Wales near Hope's with a solarium and tea and crosswords. That's important to James. Maybe more important than his own life.
No.
He says. It's simple, easy, a single word, it doesn't even hurt. Regulus stares at him, outrage coloring his face bright red.
No, are you suicidal, Potter?
That almost makes him wince, but he keeps his face blank.
Think of something else, Black. Because if you think I'm sending him back to that pit of Hades, I never will. I'll never stop loving him. My parents will never stop loving him. He's my brother now too, you twat. You should have let me fall. I'll never give him back. Not even with my last breath.
Back to...
Regulus's expression turns dumbfounded.
He'd never come back. He told me himself last term. I've accepted that. I don't need him across the hall from me, Potter. I want my brother to be my brother again.
Don't have a clue what you're talking about.
James says.
I'm not a screaming idiot, as you so colourfully called me. Sirius isn't mine to give back. I can't just hand him over. What do you want me to do here, Regulus?
Regulus's hands ball into fists at his side.
I would like you to facilitate Sirius remembering he has a natal brother, and remembering that he gives a damn about me. Is that specific enough, Potter?
James rubs at his eyes under his glasses again. He's exhausted. His head hurts. He'd very much like it if Lily would come sneak in and give him a cuddle, but he's stuck with this.
He remembers you exist already and he gives a damn about you. Is that my debt paid then?
There's a beat where Regulus's features go dumbfounded, but he schools them back to that perfect Slytherin mask, like he's looking at something distasteful.
Prove it then. That's your debt. I want you to get him speaking to me again, regularly and kindly.
James lets out a long sigh.
You know, normal people would just ask for a favor.
He holds out his hand. Regulus clasps it.
I accept.
He feels the fizzle of magic shoot through him, and he flops back against the mattress. Get the Black brothers speaking again. He can do that.
P. Third floor under Griff, 15 mins. B.
James pockets the charmed parchment scrap and curses under his breath. It's only been 5 days since he had his brain bashed in by a bludger, and sure, he's fine. But he deserves some time to be infirm, and he's been given none. The professors all have hearts, of course. He's been given a week to put his head back together, which he took, even though he felt fine the next morning. He's not an idiot. Physically, he's doing great. Emotionally, that's a laugh and a half. Because of the other thing, the nagging heap of rubbish named Regulus Black, to whom he owes a life debt, and who's decided that debt should be repaid in the most insane way possible.
Give me my brother back.
As though that's something James can even do. Sirius isn't a possession. It's very on brand for a Black to consider a person property, he thinks, as he gathers his wits and tries to figure out how he's going to convince Sirius to pry himself away from Remus for the 3rd time this week, to go on a bloody walk with him. He's getting exhausted. These brotherly meet-cutes keep winding up just awkward hellos, because neither of them really have anything to say to the other. What's Sirius got to talk to Regulus about? James can't think of anything they both like, except maybe Quidditch, and Sirius doesn't care about Quidditch if he isn't the one playing it. Then again, he really has no idea what Regulus likes, except being a git and possibly torturing kittens. James has known Sirius for 6 years, but has spoken maybe 12 sentences to Regulus before Rosier tried to kill him 5 days ago. It's not as though the Black brothers were best friends before the disowning. When he goes up to the dorm to try and grab Sirius's attention, The curtains are hexed closed and there's a silencing spell on them. James growls in frustration. The chances of Sirius and Remus coming up for air in the next hour are slim to none, never mind 15 minutes. It's been 2 days since the moon. This is the usual pattern. Remus feels better, so they lock themselves away for an afternoon. James knows this. It's been happening every month for over a year. He's just in a foul mood with all this talk of giving brothers back, and he wants some attention from his. James isn't looking forward to a summer of Sirius's locked door. He gets it. Kissing Lily is the best thing that's ever happened to him, and that's just kissing. But he still manages to find time for the lads. He was an only child for a very long time, but now that he's got a brother, he wants to hoard time to make up for the 11 years before he knew Sirius. After next year, there won't be another summer. Sirius will take off for Oxmag hand in hand with Remus, and they'll never be in each other's pockets again. That's a sad thought, and he kind of hates it, but it did manage to distract him from Big Get Black and the life debt for a moment. He stuffs his hands in his pockets and considers throwing himself off the tower. He'd be conscious this time. He'd be able to break his own fall. It would be preferable to what he's got to do, which is to have a conversation with a poncy, entitled little shit about boundaries. He's got to pay back the life debt. He doesn't have to be Regulus Black's house elf while he does it. James goes downstairs alone. He waits by a window near the portrait of Sir Gadwick the Gallant, who keeps trying to ask after the fat lady, in a way that James thinks is less gallant than his name implies he should be. Regulus is late or isn't. The instructions and the timeline are never actually clear, because James is following the plan of an insane 15-year-old, and he supposes that's his mistake. It's one he's rectifying right now. Regulus is a terrible planner, which is another thing he doesn't have in common with Sirius, actually. If Sirius wanted Regulus's attention, he would have come with charts and a timeline planned to the minute. Remus would have made them, but Sirius would have had the ideas.
Potter, I didn't want to run into you.
He says as he turns the corner.
Oh, but you sent me a love note.
He crosses his arms and leans against the wall.
Sirius isn't available.
Regulus frowns at him.
What do you mean?
He's otherwise occupied.
I'm sure your pranking can wait.
Sure.
James agrees.
I'll let you into the dorm, and you can unhex his curtains and tell him that.
Unhex his. Oh,
Regulus looks a little green around the edges.
in the middle of the day.
I'm not discouraging the middle of the day. I'm not in the room in the middle of the day. I prefer this.
He shrugs.
You need a better plan anyway.
Regulus's face turns to outrage.
What's wrong with my plan?
Well, for one, you don't have one.
He goes a little red. It's less endearing of a look than it is on Sirius. They have shockingly similar faces. Now that he's spent more than 30 seconds thinking about Regulus Black, the resemblance is honestly bothersome. Sirius has a thinner nose, fuller lips, and better eyebrows. He's better looking, is what James means. Not that James specifically pays attention to that sort of thing, but he's observant. He knows what his brother looks like. He knows his evil twin isn't exactly identical.
I told you if you bring him.
You'll both exchange increasingly awkward hellos for the rest of eternity. If that was working for you, I'd be paid off and free of you. But, alas.
Regulus gives him a mean, hateful look that looks bizarre on his face.
He's my brother. I haven't done anything to make him hate me. You have, you cunt. You've turned him against me.
James holds up both his hands. That's a bit strong.
I haven't done anything to you.
He says.
Can't even remember the last time I said your name before this started.
Regulus holds his glare.
Well, he used to be my best friend, and now we don't even speak. That's down to you.
That's down to Orion and Wahlberger, and you know it. You just don't want to admit it, because then you'd have to blame them, and that's too much for you.
James knows he's right from the 7 colors Regulus turns.
What's your brilliant plan, then?
James smirks.
Oh, I'm going to lock you in a closet.
He says.
On Tuesday, after history.
That also isn't a plan.
Regulus says, poking threateningly at him with a finger.
That's a crime maybe, but it's not a plan.
Well, I never claimed to be a mastermind. You've forbidden me from telling anyone, and Remus does all of our planning. He's got charts.
He's a prefect.
Yeah, well, that's why he's got charts and I don't.
James inspects his fingernails for a while, trying to look as uninterested as possible.
A closet will force a conversation, which passing each other in a hallway never will. It's worth a try, at least.
A closet? Absolutely not, Potter. Think of something better.
Claustrophobic.
No, just not daft enough to think you know a locking spell he won't be able to break in less than 10 seconds.
I know loads of spells he doesn't know.
James says.
I have to do something while he's tucked up behind hexed curtains with Mooney.
Regulus glowers at him.
He's a better wizard than you are, you arse.
That gets a scoff out of him.
That's just not true, and I've got the owl results to prove it.
Tests?
Regulus says, waving a hand dismissively.
I can steal his wand before I lock him in the closet then.
James suggests.
It's a stupid idea. Your desperate attempts are awful. Think of something else, or we keep doing this until it sticks.
James brightens, because he likes Plan B better than Plan A anyway.
I can break your arm. That'll get you to the hospital wing, and he can fix you up. He's chatty when he's healing.
Regulus narrows his eyes at him.
I'm not letting you break my arm.
He says,
But the hospital wing isn't a bad plan. It's better than locking me in a closet.
I can lock you in a closet with a broken arm.
James says, feeling suddenly mean.
Life debts don't preclude me doing harm to you for being awful.
Regulus rolls his eyes.
I'll allow you to hit me hard enough to bruise. Meet me back here after dinner. He goes up there right after, doesn't he?
During,
James says.
he stays until 10. Can I hit you in the face?
Genuinely, Potter, I don't understand what he sees in you.
Regulus sighs and tucks a curl behind his ear.
You're an absolute troll. He shouldn't have fought with the sorting hat. He would have saved me quite a lot of headaches.
That makes James outraged. He's rather glad he gets to hit Regulus after dinner now. The little fucker deserves it for this life debt and the nonsense he keeps spewing.
If you think he would have found better friends in Slytherin, you're loony.
James calls out to Regulus's retreating back.
Rosier and Snape. That's a laugh and a half.
Regulus stops and glances back at him over his shoulder.
Slytherin.
He says, amused.
Sirius was never going to Slytherin. Even Mother knew that.
He takes off before James can gather his wits to ask what that means. Chapter 2, Sirius. Regulus comes into the hospital wing with a bruised cheek and a bloody lip on after dinner on Thursday. Sirius frowns at him and puts him on a cot.
I'll go get Madame Pomfrey.
He says.
No.
Regulus half shouts.
I'd rather you do it.
Sirius hesitates.
I'm supposed to get Pomfrey for the upper year Slytherins.
He says.
That's the deal.
Something passes over Regulus's face that breaks Sirius's heart a little, but he tries to keep his poker face on.
I'm not Sirius. I'm your brother for Merlin's sake. I'm not Anne. It shouldn't count for me.
Sirius glances at her office door. He looks back at Regulus, thinking. Certainly, Regulus qualifies as an upper-year Slytherin. He's a fifth. The deal was fifths through sevenths go to Pomfrey because Sirius has a history with most of them. And sure, he's got history with Regulus, but most of that history is dabbing Dittany on his scraped-up knees. Really, Reg is his oldest patient if he thinks about it.
All right.
He says with a sigh. He pulls up a stool and sits next to him.
What happened?
I was punched in the face.
Regulus says, pointing at his bruised cheek.
Obviously Sirius.
Not obviously.
Sirius answers.
You could have been hexed, or hit with a bat, or, I don't know, whatever Slytherins do in the dungeon to each other.
Regulus rolls his eyes. Sirius reaches out toward him, and he frowns when Regulus flinches away from him before he can even touch him. He considers getting Pomfrey again, because if Reg is flinching before he's even really under his care, that's not ideal. Patients need to trust their healers, especially trust that they won't hurt them further. He and Reg weren't really ever very violent with each other. They pushed each other around, they scuffled occasionally, certainly, but Sirius was a hovering nanny from the first time he saw his tiny baby brother. Regulus was his, and Blacks were to care for things that were theirs. Sirius knew that even then, not yet 2 years old and awkwardly toddling. Regulus stopped being his around the time Sirius came home with a red and gold tie. Sirius still fixed his bumps and bruises until Regulus stopped letting him. Now he's standing in front of his baby brother, helplessly watching blood trickle down his lip and staring at a bruise on his cheek and wondering if he's even allowed to touch him. Sirius hates Walburga and Orion for a lot of reasons, but making his brother find him distasteful is high on the list. Not quite the top thing, but close.
I can get Madame Pomfrey.
Sirius says again.
She won't mind. It'll take just a minute.
No.
Regulus straightens his shoulders.
I want you.
Who did it?
Regulus stays silent for a while, watching Sirius inspect the bruise. It looks like a physical hit, not a hex mark, and he's glad Reg isn't trying to lie to him.
Just someone Sirius. Does it matter?
Well,
He pauses to consider his words. He pulls out his wand and tosses it between hands while he thinks.
I'm supposed to report this kind of thing to your head of house, and I'd like to know who's punching my brother, personally.
Something like joy passes over Regulus's face, but he squashes it back into his usual mask.
Why would you care?
He asks.
So I could go punch them back, obviously.
Sirius says.
Nobody gets to hit you but me.
That pulls a laugh out of Reg, and Sirius relaxes a measure.
You haven't ever punched me.
He points out.
Right, that's the point. I get hit instead of you. It's the natural order of things.
He shoots an Episkey at Regulus's split lip and watches as it neatly knits together.
Do you want a spell or a salve for your eye?
Spell.
Regulus says.
I hate the salve, you know that.
Sirius does. When they were small, he only had bruise salve to use. They both hated it. Sirius is used to it now, from his months with Pomfrey, but it still brings back memories of his bedroom in Grimald, with a crying Regulus in his lap, some manner of bump or bruise on him that sent him running for Sirius to make it feel better.
How's Lupin?
Regulus asks, breaking Sirius out of his memories.
Fine.
Sirius thinks that's come out of left field. Regulus famously hates all of Sirius's friends, and always has since the moment he came home after first year with stories about them.
Why? Did Remus punch you?
Regulus rolls his eyes at him.
Tuesday was 2 days ago, Sirius.
Oh.
The moon.
He's fine, right as rain. Thanks for asking, I suppose.
He shoots a second healing charm at Regulus's bruise, and it fades away.
Thank you.
Regulus says.
I'm glad he's all right. I've been reading. It sounds awful.
Sirius searches Regulus's face for cruelty and finds none, just a sort of strange open hope that he's unused to seeing there.
It is,
He says.
and I live annoyed, knowing there's nothing I can do to make it less awful.
I've read a lot about potential folk remedies.
Sirius can't help but laugh.
Remus doesn't have patience for the crackpots,
He says.
and nor do I. It's incurable.
Regulus frowns at him, all narrowed eyes.
Have you even bothered to try, or have you resigned yourself to moving to Toronto already?
He doesn't want to go to Toronto.
Sirius says imperiously.
I've already asked. Nor Montreal.
Oh, Montreal, where you can show off your abysmal French.
Tu es impoli, mon frère.
Sirius says, sticking his tongue out.
Abysmal, like I said. You've gotten worse. Madame Dubois would whack your knuckles.
Sirius laughs.
I don't miss her.
Do you miss me?
It sounds half desperate, which sideswipes Sirius directly in the heart.
Of course I do.
He says.
You're the only good thing that rotten house ever had in it.
He means that too. If he'd had half a brain when he ran away, he would have grabbed Regulus by the collar and taken him too. Walburga wouldn't have let Sirius take him, but he could have tried. Without Sirius there's nothing to stop Grimald Place from eating away at everything good inside him. He hopes that hasn't happened. He doesn't think it has. That half-desperate look of hope gives Sirius some of his own.
Well,
He says, sticking his wand back into his robe pocket.
you're all sorted.
Thanks.
Regulus says. He hops up from the cot and stands there, hands by his sides and half a frown on his face.
I miss you quite a lot.
He adds so softly Sirius almost misses it.
Well, I'm here Thursday and most Saturdays.
Sirius says, trying for light and missing.
Available for all sorts of bumps and scrapes. Even the odd hex, although I need a hand with the complicated ones.
Regulus's eyes shudder again, back to their usual unreadable stone gray.
Good to know.
He says, and then he's off, through the door, leaving Sirius spinning for a good long while, until Brad Shakely comes in with his hand stuck to his prick, and that's distracting enough to make him forget all about Reg. On Saturday, he's back again, with an odd, persistent sneeze that Sirius takes 2 hours to figure out is a hex. Pomfrey would have known in a minute flat, and he goes back to the dorm feeling like a failure as a healer for not knowing, and as a brother for letting Reg suffer rather than go get Pomfrey. Regulus comes back on Thursday with hives. He ate strawberries, which he's allergic to, despite Walburga's best efforts to condition it out with exposure to strawberries. That was Sirius's first ever shouting match with her, all those years ago. He doesn't want Pomfrey, though. He's been clear about that every time. He wants Sirius, and Sirius quite likes having time with him again. The 2 hours Reg was down there Saturday were nice, despite the constant achoo's peppering their conversation. It's a pattern, though. Before the great Quidditch debacle of 1977, Regulus hadn't ever been to the hospital wing while Sirius was there. Now it seems like every day, he's in again. He's thinking hard about it when he goes back to the dorm at 10. It's bothering him a lot, enough for him to bring it up to the lads once he drops his bag on the floor.
I think Regulus is being bullied.
He says, loudly enough to catch the other three's attention.
He's been in hospital 3 times. Someone fed him strawberries.
James looks up from where he's sprawled sideways on his bed, reading a comic.
You don't think he's just daft and forgot to check his croissants?
He's not.
Sirius says, voice sharp and hard, thinking of Regulus silently crying while Walburga made him eat an entire plate of strawberries when he was 6. Sirius had to steal the allergy potion from his parents' washroom, and Regulus spent the night curled up in Sirius's bed, sobbing so hard he shook the frame. He wouldn't forget to check his food.
All right, so he's getting roughed up. We all got roughed up, it's part of Hogwarts.
James closes the comic and rolls himself up to sitting.
If you started counting the times I went to hospital, you'd have to accuse yourself of bullying.
I do frequently.
Sirius crosses his arms and glances back at Peter, who's watching with interest.
Peter, any opinion?
The Slytherins are angry about the match, but I don't know anything else aside from that. Don't have a clue about Regulus.
Peter shrugs and scoots to the edge of his bed.
I don't think they know what he did after he caught prongs, though. I would have heard from Penny.
Peter's newest girlfriend, Penny Thickwhistle, has a Slytherin brother. It's the closest they've ever been to having an inside man to what's going on in the dungeon.
They could be angry enough without knowing the extent of what happened.
Remus puts in from where he's propped up on pillows in his own bed. Sirius finds that distasteful. He expected to find Remus in his bed, which they've claimed as their shared bed for the term.
We have to figure out who, because I won't stand for it.
Sirius says as he tosses his robe on top of his trunk and toes off his shoes. He throws himself onto his bed and stares up at the canopy.
I shall have to hurt whoever is doing it, since clearly Reg isn't.
Not sure violence is the answer.
James says, sounding strangely strangled. Sirius glances over at him.
He's my brother. I'm sure he can handle a sneezing hex, but the strawberries. That's an attempted poisoning. I won't stand for it, Prongs.
Rosier's probably the place to start.
Remus says. He looks like he's been writing letters based on the packet of envelopes by his knee.
He's been getting roughed up himself for costing them the game.
He hasn't been in.
Sirius slides his hands under his head and closes his eyes. Thursdays are long and he's got potions in the morning, which is annoying and exhausting.
Well, you aren't there all the time.
James points out.
And the same goes for Regulus. Maybe you've just gotten unlucky. I'm sure Slytherins try to poison each other all the time.
Sirius sighs.
I've got access to his chart, you know. He's never been poisoned before.
His mattress shifts and he peeks open an eye. He smiles because there's his Moony sitting on the edge of the bed.
I'm sure you aren't supposed to be chatting about Regulus's private medical records.
Remus says. Sirius reaches out and grabs at him to pull him down next to him. Remus comes willingly, laughing a little, and he hides his face against the side of Sirius's.
I'm telling you what hasn't happened, which is poisoning, until today, and I'm not letting that go unpunished.
Remus knows about the strawberries. Remus knows everything. Sirius doesn't think there's a single horrible thing he hasn't told Remus in the dead of the night, cocooned in blankets and Moony's arms, when he knows the others aren't listening, and he doesn't feel weak for not being able to stop it all happening. He knows he wasn't. For a long time, he was just a child. Even when he was a teenager, what was he supposed to do to stop 2 full-grown adults? He protected Regulus until he couldn't anymore, until Regulus didn't want his protection anymore. Sirius spends an awful lot of energy trying very hard to not think about life at Grimmauld Place. That's behind him. Rosewood House is home now, and Dad would never cast a silencing charm on his throat for talking back and leave it there a whole week. The problem is, right now he's thinking very much about how it isn't behind Regulus. Hogwarts has always been, for both of them, 9 months of peace. He won't stand for that being taken away from Regulus. Not for any reason, really, but especially not because he saved James.
Have you asked him?
Moony asks.
He won't say who's doing it.
Sirius has asked all 3 times.
Rosier makes sense. He's a pathetic troll. I could scare him in the morning.
Remus flicks him.
Perhaps don't go off half-cocked and start throwing hexes based on a hunch. You'll get yourself tossed in detention for weeks.
I haven't gotten a single detention all term,
Sirius says, sounding haughty.
which is more than you can say, Prefect Moony.
That pulls a laugh out of Remus, who peeks up at him, grinning.
I'm just saying, Padfoot, be smart about it.
All right, what would Moony do?
Show them you're watching.
He says, And that's a good idea. That's easy. Sirius slides onto the bench next to Regulus at the Slytherin table and takes a croissant off the serving plate in front of him.
Hello, brother.
He says. Regulus jumps a mile.
Sirius.
Regulus peers around, probably looking for trouble, but there isn't any. It's still early, there's hardly anyone there. Sirius woke up absurdly early for this. Crouch and Caro are together, a ways down, staring at him with gaped mouths. Good. They won't be able to keep their mouths shut, and whoever's been hurting Regulus might get the message that Sirius is watching. He breaks the croissant open. Almonds. He offers half of it to his shocked-looking brother, who takes it and sets it on his plate.
How are you feeling?
Fine.
Regulus answers. He looks twitchy now, still peering around as if the table's going to explode.
Right as rain.
Good, I'm glad. Breathing's all right.
I'm fine, Sirius.
He says.
I was fine when I left last night, if you'll recall.
I recall that you're stubborn and mightn't tell me if you've still got hives.
Which is true. Regulus used to hide cuts from Walburga shattering glass all the time. That just made it harder for Sirius to fix him up when he inevitably got an infected cut from leaving glass in his skin for days.
Well, I'm not 12 anymore. I'm not an idiot, although I'm sure you're used to idiots now. I'd come for a second dose if I needed one.
Sirius picks at his croissant for a while, silent. Regulus goes back to his own plate, but he keeps stealing glances at Sirius as though he can't believe he's sitting there.
You've got charms this morning.
Sirius asks when the silence starts to turn awkward. Regulus nods.
Though it's all revising now for owls. I haven't learned anything new in weeks.
You've just got to get through it. Once you start the advanced classes, that's when the real fun starts. I've felt actually properly challenged here and there in charms this year.
Rumour is you've needed tutoring from Flitwick this term.
Regulus glances at him with an amused arch to his eyebrow.
I've said that's ridiculous, but here you are admitting it.
Sirius snorts.
I'm not being tutored. I've been given extra instruction.
That's the same thing, brother.
Sirius makes an amused face back and picks up a piece of toast. He puts it flat in his left palm and holds it in front of Regulus's face. He pushes against the magic that's always there, half itching under his skin, and it twists into a little toast dog.
It's not remedial.
He says as Regulus stares open-mouthed at it.
And this one came out good.
He sets the tiny toast padfoot on the table in front of Regulus's plate and goes back to his croissant, watching Regulus out of the corner of his eye as he pokes and prods at the little toast dog, who takes it personally and tries to nip at him.
That's a party trick, isn't it?
Regulus says. It's a goad, and Sirius knows it, and he's going to let himself fall for it. He shrugs. He's not great shakes at wandless magic, at least not yet, not after only a handful of lessons, but he's got a few incantations up his sleeve. He lifts his hand back up, trying for casual and hopefully landing it, and mutters avophors under his breath, and the tiny toast padfoot bursts into feathers and soars up into the air above the Slytherin table.
Not really.
He says around a laugh, watching Regulus track the tiny little songbird across the room with wide, shocked eyes.
I've got to get back.
He says, looking over his shoulder at Remus, sitting alone at Gryffindor, still working on whatever letter he was writing the night before.
Be safe, little brother. I'm always watching. Je t'aime.
He sees the desperate hope in Regulus's face again.
Je t'aime.
He echoes.
Your accent is atrocious.
And yours is impeccable, as always.
Sirius answers as he hops up off the bench and starts across the great hall. He feels Crouch and Caro watching him as he trots over to Remus and settles down next to him. He hopes they pass the message along, and that it finds its way where it needs to go. Regulus Black is protected, and Sirius doesn't need a wand to do it. Chapter 3, Remus.
Remus, I hope this letter finds you in good health. Hope tells me your last monthly obligation went well. I'm glad Sirius is there to help you and to ease the difficulty. Monty and I worry about you monthly, and we're glad to know you have some measure of relief. To the meat of your letter this morning, I'm a bit surprised to hear that Sirius went all in, as they say. Candidly, I expected he would find all of this too close to what Monty's cousins wanted him to do at precisely the time that they'd want him to do it. I'm happy to hear that I'm wrong, and that he wants to cherish your engagement and celebrate joining with his life's great love. The celebrations are all excuses to have several lovely parties, with the 7th being the hand-fasting. I'll be happy to be your guide through them if you opt for a traditional path. But Remus, speak to Sirius. Your decisions are the ones that matter more than rigid tradition, and you shouldn't ignore your own rituals in favour of ours. A mixed-faith family isn't uncommon these days. Don't lose your own identity, darling. I'm going to be thrilled to call you my son, Remus. Answering your questions isn't a burden, it's a joy. Please don't hesitate to write to me any time, I promise. I look forward to your letters. Yours, Euphemia.
Owls don't often come to the tower. They tend to wait for the morning to deliver. Remus worried he was imposing too much when he wrote her. He wonders if she noticed and rushed to answer. He's grateful. Sending that letter on after breakfast had been nerve-wracking. He's glad he doesn't have to wait any longer than that evening for an answer from her.
Who's the letter from?
Sirius asks in a too polite tone that tells Remus he knows exactly who the letter is from and just wants to pry. He's already nestled in the blankets, fruitlessly trying to rub sleep out of his eyes. But even a tired Sirius is an aware Sirius.
Euphemia.
Sirius perks up.
Oh, what's Mum got to say?
Remus folds the letter back into thirds and puts it in his bedside table.
I asked her for help on sorting out your traditions.
He says, Remus doesn't, as a rule, keep many secrets from Sirius. That's partially on McGonagall's advice after the incident, to make sure Sirius feels as though he can be open and honest with him, but also his own personal vow. Sirius doesn't keep many things from him either. At least Remus hopes he doesn't. He settles back on the bed, leaning against the headboard. Sirius pulls himself up to sitting, cross-legged, next to him.
Could have asked me.
Sirius leans against him.
Summer solstice is next, and it's fun. Midsummer. There's quite a lot of wine and dancing. We'll have dinner at Tippy's again, probably, and there's a ritual at sunrise and sunset that I won't make you sit through.
Maybe I'd like to.
Remus fumbles for his hand and then brings it up to kiss his knuckles.
But I meant marriage tradition, Sirius.
Sirius turns oddly red.
Oh, well, we don't have to.
Maybe I'd like to.
Remus interrupts, repeating himself. He isn't going to let this be another stumbling, drawn-out confession of wanting something, like when Sirius spent an excruciating hour trying to tell Remus he'd like to be a healer and wants to go to Oxford.
I just don't know where to start.
Sirius brightens.
I know a book. I used to have a copy, but, well, Orion. I remember the title, and I'm sure Pince has it in the library.
I don't want a book.
Remus kisses his knuckles again.
I want to know what your traditions are. You, Sirius Black.
He makes a discontented noise.
Well, first, Orion was going to arrange my marriage, Mooney, so we're already out of the scope of my traditions. I didn't go to Orion and express my interest over all the other potential matches, and have him owl your father to draw up a contract.
He flicks Sirius gently on the cheek with his free hand.
Don't be obtuse. You have things you want. If you didn't, you wouldn't have been panicky about the ring.
All right. Yes. I wanted you to have a ring. I wanted you protected by my magic for the rest of your life, as possessive and awful as that is.
He falls forward, hiding his face in Remus's shoulder, curls spilling down Remus's chest, stark black against Remus's white sleep shirt.
I don't care about the rest of it. Whatever you want.
Remus squeezes at his fingers and cups the back of his neck with his free hand. This is what he worries about late at night sometimes, the same nagging fear that Sirius is giving up something important for him. Remus isn't religious. He never was, but the bite would have probably made him a cynic on the concept of a loving God if he had been. He's fairly sure the priest at his Grand's church would have an issue marrying two men anyway.
I genuinely want what you want, Sirius.
It's settling and not telling the whole story, but he doesn't have the energy left in him for full, open honesty today.
Am I supposed to get you a ring?
No.
Sirius says into his shoulder.
I'm supposed to get a family ring from Dad, since I've done the asking.
He sighs and peers up through a curtain of black curls at Remus.
James probably already has a selection from the vault picked out for me to choose from.
Remus laughs softly, stroking his fingers along the back of Sirius's neck.
He absolutely does, the sappy fucker.
You can get me a ring if you want, though.
Sirius pushes his hair out of his face, and that makes Remus smile. He's always glad when Sirius doesn't want to hide anymore.
I'd like to have your magic protecting me, too.
That cracks his heart a little. He's already used to the feeling of Sirius's protego coming from the ring all the time, and the morning after the moon, he felt the healing charm fizzle through him when Sirius slipped the ring back onto his finger. It's comforting. It feels like being kept safe all the time, even when Sirius isn't standing next to him. He'd like to do that for him, too.
Do you think
He says, slowly because the thought is still forming.
That Monty would let me have one of the rings from the vault enchanted.
Sirius raises his eyebrows.
I'd like that. I'll ask.
I'll ask.
Remus counters because that feels more correct.
I still want you to pick it out, though.
Sirius goes to the hospital wing after breakfast on most Saturdays, and this morning isn't an exception. He kisses Remus goodbye when he finishes his eggs and takes off, leaving Remus with nothing but homework and James and Peter for company. Losing Saturdays feels like he's being robbed sometimes. He'd never say that, because then Sirius would stop going, and Remus hasn't ever seen Sirius so excited about something in the whole time he's known him. And there's always Sunday. It's good practice for reality anyway. Healers work odd hours, and Remus knows he's going to have an abundance of free time himself, since his chances of finding a stable full-time job are absolutely zero. He'll get his newts. He'll freelance, maybe. He's a serviceable writer and a decent research assistant. He could tutor. He's got options. They aren't great. They won't add to their Gringotts account in any way that matters. Not that he ever could, anyway. He's seen the paperwork from the solicitor. They could both live comfortably for 300 years on what Alfred left behind. He doesn't feel particularly emasculated by the idea of being a kept man, just frustrated by it. Sirius will keep him safe and happy and fed, but Remus should be able to do at least the last bit himself. He can, is the worst part. He's smart and talented and a damn good wizard. He could have been an Auror if not for the lycanthropy, maybe an unspeakable. Remus doesn't know. He never really got a chance to dream about it. What it boils down to is that he's going to have a lot of free time, and Sirius won't, and Saturdays are good practice for that. None of that stops him from hating it. After lunch, Remus is bored of Prongs and Wormtail's company. He's got a limit, and it's 2 chess matches and approximately 20 minutes of listening to Peter and Prongs' mind-numbing conversation about competing narratives in Martin Miggs comics over the years. Remus, whose nerdiness never quite got to comic levels, leaves them to it. He stops in the kitchen to pick up a sandwich and a bowl of fruit for Sirius, since Remus knows he hasn't thought to stop and get himself lunch. He always comes to dinner on Saturday nights complaining about how hungry he is. Maybe he'll just have to be useful in other ways, things other than helping pay the rent or put food on the table. He's good at taking care of Sirius. He went pro last year and hasn't looked back. He smells cloves before he even gets through the door, and that makes him smile. He hears Sirius's voice too. There's that lovely rumble he could listen to forever.
This is getting out of hand, Reg.
He's saying, and Remus stops.
I just fell down some stairs, Sirius.
And you hexed yourself and punched yourself and fed yourself strawberries too.
Sure.
Regulus says, sounding glum.
If that's what you need to hear, I did.
Remus stays by the door. He knows better than to nose in on Sirius with a patient, and he knows Regulus will shut down if he turns the corner and comes into sight.
That's not what I need to hear. I need the truth, little brother, or I'm going to have to involve Pomfrey and Slughorn. You're getting beat on. I've told you, only I get to beat on you.
There's a long pause.
You can't beat on me because you're never around me anyway.
Regulus says. He sounds terrible, like Sirius in the worst of his depression, and alarm bells start going off in Remus's head.
What would you like me to do? Write Walburga and have her set up a playdate?
Frustration leaks out of Sirius's voice.
You haven't wanted me around for ages. You told me 3 years ago to stay away from you. I don't. Tu me détestes?
Non.
Comes Regulus's snapped reply.
Je t'aime, mais tu es bête et tu m'as remplacé.
Oh, shut up with that.
Sirius snaps back at him.
Stop calling me stupid. I've told you already I haven't replaced you.
What do you call Potter then?
Brother, because he is. Having more than one sibling is, if you didn't know, possible. He's less of an absolute twat about sharing, though.
Remus clutches Sirius's lunch just a little tighter to him. Sirius doesn't usually sound so mean.
Oh, please, however will you have time for 2 brothers when you spend all your time spreading your legs like a bitch in heat?
Remus almost goes barreling around the corner into the main wing, but before he can, Sirius bursts into laughter.
Really, brother, Animagus jokes.
What?
There's another beat of silence.
Nothing, never mind.
Sirius sighs.
Stop getting pushed around, Regulus. Fight back, or I'll start fighting for you.
You wouldn't have a clue who to go after.
I'll start with Avery and work my way to Yaxley, in alphabetical order.
Something's bothered Remus about this since the start of it 2 weeks ago. Not negatively, nothing nefarious, He's seen Regulus at the Slytherin table. He's still lording over them, king of the dungeon, and Remus can't imagine he's actually being hurt by someone in the house. They'd be laid out flat for the crime of it, probably by Regulus, who isn't a slouch and would certainly at least hex back. He's not going to let them argue, though. They've been getting along lately. Sirius is talking about Regulus fondly, in the present tense, which he hasn't done for ages. So he knocks on the post of a bed and pokes his head around the corner.
Got you some lunch?
He says, putting on his best smile.
Hello, Regulus.
Lupin.
Regulus says impassively.
Being a good future Black wife, I see.
He won't let himself rise to the bait.
I was hoping you'd have some time to sit and eat.
He says to Sirius.
I will.
He waves Remus toward the attending desk where he does homework and levels another glare at Regulus. He mutters something in French Remus can't make out, and Regulus answers back, rapid fire. Remus knows some of those. He's heard Sirius's creative insults before. He didn't know Regulus used them too. He didn't actually know Sirius spoke this much French. It's incredibly disorienting and also kind of hot. Remus has always had a thing for Sirius speaking words in general. His voice is lovely, but there's a whole second layer when Remus doesn't know what he's saying and he has a different accent on. Regulus hops up from the cot.
I'll leave you two to your strange Gryffindor mating rituals.
He says,
And you need an elocution lesson, Sirius. I can hardly understand what you're trying to say to me.
Fuck off.
Sirius says, over-enunciating each word.
That's English and quite clear.
I'll tutor you if you'd like.
Regulus barrels on, ignoring him.
And we can fix whatever Godric's Hollow and his tower have done to your English accent along with it.
Actually, Regulus, I take it back. They can beat on you all they'd like.
Remus knows he doesn't mean it. He hopes Regulus does too. Sirius comes to Remus at the desk and fishes a raspberry out of the fruit bowl he's set on the table. Regulus comes up behind him and glances down at the fruit. There's no strawberries. Sirius doesn't like them, which is probably down to Regulus being allergic. He plucks up a blackberry and pops it into his mouth. Cheeky fucker, Remus thinks. Sirius just rolls his eyes.
Get your own lunch.
He says, swatting Regulus's hand away from the bowl when he reaches back for another berry.
And you were lecturing me on sharing just a moment ago.
Regulus tuts.
Have you never heard of leading by example?
Je comprends pas.
Sirius pops the raspberry into his mouth.
Stop stealing my berries. Find your own fiancé to get you fruit.
Priscilla Parkinson. According to father, although it's still in early stages.
Regulus lets out a frustrated huff of breath.
I do not like her. It won't stick.
Scare her off.
Sirius advises.
It'll be easy. Priscilla doesn't want the match anyway.
Remus shakes his head. The entire arranged marriage business seems barbarous to him. He couldn't imagine it. The idea that his father would have the final say in the person with whom he was expected to live an entire life is horrifying to him. And that's just something Sirius always thought would happen to him. Something Regulus just accepts as well. It's mind-boggling.
Or I could just tell father, and he'd find someone else. I've got an angle I'm working.
Regulus says, waving Sirius off before he can interrupt.
I'm seeing someone. She's a good fit for the family, and it mightn't matter anyway. Dear Priscilla's been seen on her knees for Ross, and to that I say best of luck to him.
Running away worked a treat.
Sirius says.
There's spare rooms at Rosewood House.
Regulus scoffs at him.
I'm not becoming a Potter to avoid my familial obligations. I'll get what I want in the end, all of it, without compromise.
There's something ominous there that makes the little hairs on the back of Remus's neck prick up. Sirius doesn't seem bothered, but he might not see the glinting look in Regulus's gray eyes. Remus thinks his hunch is right. Something else is going on. Regulus isn't being bullied. This is a scheme, and Remus doesn't like not knowing what the endgame is. He corners James before dinner, near the fireplace, where he's extracting himself from an afternoon spent cuddled up to Lily.
I think Regulus is scheming.
He says without waiting for James to even stand. He doesn't care if Lily knows.
And I'm worried that whatever he's up to is going to hurt Sirius, so we need to sort it out and stop it.
James stops halfway to standing.
What?
Regulus, his trips to hospital.
If Remus didn't have absolute confidence in Pomfrey and Sirius, he'd think James was still suffering from a head injury.
Sure, all right.
James agrees, straightening up.
What sort of a scheme?
Lily asks.
No clue.
Remus says.
I went to see Sirius after lunch, and he was there, and he said some things that made me think. He can't be allowed to hurt him. I won't stand for it. I don't think.
His eyes flick to Lily and back to James.
I don't think it would be good for him.
James visibly swallows.
I mean, he saved my life. I don't think he's being nefarious.
Remus considered this in his calculus already.
You were hit by a tampered bludger when you were conveniently flying close enough for him to catch you.
There's a moment where Remus thinks he's victorious in outthinking James, but James shakes his head.
Sorry, Mooney. I owe him a life debt. That means he didn't cause my harm.
He watches Remus's face for a moment.
Don't tell Sirius you thought Regulus arranged an attempted murder. He'll explode.
Remus deflates. He knows he's still right, even if he hasn't got all the details sorted. He tells James as much, and James shakes his head again.
I don't think he's trying to hurt him.
I don't think Regulus knows what would and wouldn't hurt him at all.
Remus crosses his arms.
He hates us. He very much hates me, and I'm...
He takes in a sharp little puff of air. He doesn't want to say the things he's thinking aloud. That if what Regulus wants with no compromise is Sirius back as the future head of the family, knocking Remus out of the picture is the quickest, easiest path. He's selfish, he's keeping Sirius. Remus also knows that Sirius won't ever stop loving him, so he doesn't feel bad about his selfishness. He does worry that Sirius will run back if he feels that Regulus needs him. He loves his brother, even when he hates him, and he's been protecting him his whole life. Remus has heard all the stories, buried under blankets and holding Sirius against his chest while he sobbed words into Remus's skin. Walburga is a twisted wraith, heartless and loveless. Orion is a monster of a different sort, creeping in the dark, silent and still, but no less awful. For years, Sirius stood between them and Regulus, dodging bursting glass, standing in front of hexes, getting locked in his room, and cursed silent and sent to bed without dinner, night after night. Remus won't let him go back. He won't let Regulus take Sirius's peace and drag him back down into the darkness. Sirius's spiral started long before he told Snape about the shack. Returning to Walburga and Orion would be a death sentence. James and Lily are still staring at him, waiting for him to complete his thought.
I'm the reason he left.
He expects James to be the one to speak, but it's Lily instead.
You were the last thing, but you weren't the only thing.
She says. It's comforting, especially from her, who wasn't there to bear witness to it all. Remus closes his eyes.
There's still something wrong. Regulus is up to something.
Paranoia doesn't fit you, Mooney.
James tells him. He claps a hand on Remus's shoulder.
But if you want, we can go corner him after dinner, and you can give him that disapproving look that makes Sirius look like he wants to cry. We can see if the reaction's genetic.
And Remus would like that, actually. There's a small, disused office down in the dungeons near Slughorns that Remus camps out in after dinner. He's had to lie to Sirius and beg off on prefect duty, which makes him angry at himself and Regulus and the entire universe, actually, because it's Bloody Saturday, and he's spending the 7 o'clock hour waiting for James to shove Regulus Black through a doorway and do some light kidnapping. He sometimes misses the days when they were absolute Burks, with no consciences to speak of. But that caught up, and quick, and now he worries like he's 70 and not 17. He hears a yelped shout, and then the door swings open, and Regulus stumbles through, glaring over his shoulder.
Potter if you wanted.
He catches sight of Remus out of the corner of his eye and whips around.
Lupin.
Regulus.
He says mildly as James slams the door behind him and tosses lock after lock at it, as quietly as possible. James leans back against the door, arms and ankles crossed, wand held loose in his hand, and he nods at Remus. He looks intimidating. That's good. Remus isn't very intimidating, which is sort of funny, given that James is a part-time deer and Remus is a full-time werewolf. Regulus turns to James.
I told you no closets.
This is an office.
James points out.
And that's Remus. He wanted to have words with you.
Regulus spins back in his direction, looking bored and haughty, one eyebrow raised.
If you're looking for permission to marry my brother, I believe that ship has sailed.
Remus watches his eyes for a moment. They're that same blank gray Sirius used to have, back in first year before he realized they actually wanted to be his friends, and they might like him even better if he let his guard down. Remus can read around that blank hard stare. Regulus is nervous underneath the veneer.
If I were seeking permission, I'd go to his father.
Remus says.
Dad approves.
James throws in and Remus sees the twitch in Regulus's hands.
Potter dowry's mutual, it's a vow of fidelity.
Regulus rolls his eyes.
Pathetic, Potter. A vow of fidelity. What do you vow at the actual hand fasting?
2 lives lived as one.
James shoots him a pitying look.
Although no 2 Potter hand fastings use the same vows.
Half-hearted.
Regulus murmurs.
What do you need, Lupin, that you've locked me in an office to get?
Remus narrows his eyes at him.
You aren't being hurt.
My medical records would disagree with you.
Regulus is still trying for board. Remus can still see through him. There's a new kind of nervousness in his face, like he's been found out.
You're doing it on purpose.
Remus is sure of this now. He still doesn't know what Regulus's endgame is, but he knows, from that nervous glint behind his careful mask, that he's right.
I didn't know you were so concerned about my health.
Regulus drawls.
I'm touched, Lupin.
He decides to scrap the initial intimidation plan. It won't work, not on someone who grew up in Grimmauld Place. His plan takes a sharp left turn.
Sirius is worried about you. You getting hurt is upsetting to him.
I've noticed. He's been scolding me.
Regulus arches an eyebrow at him.
Has he sent you to try and extract information? You are a terrible interrogator, by the way.
And you're a bad liar.
Remus says, which he knows stings.
It's written all over your face.
Regulus says nothing, but his eyes narrow. Remus steps forward into Regulus's space. His wand is away, but he doesn't need it for this. Intimidation isn't his forte, but he can baldly threaten just as well as anyone. Sometimes better. Regulus knows the truth about him. He knows Remus can actually hurt him.
If you're planning on hurting him, Regulus.
Hurting him?
There's real outrage on his face now, mask dropped.
You think I'd hurt Sirius? I thought you were the one with the brains, Lupin, of all his Gryffindors. I've got no interest in hurting my brother, you absolute lunatic. I want to spend time with him.
He seems to realize what he said a split second too late, and his hand flies to his mouth. He blinks wildly for a moment and composes himself, taking a too big breath and pursing his lips. Remus takes a step backward. Of all the things he'd considered, this never even made the list. Regulus strides forward across the barely foot of space between them and grabs Remus by the front of his jumper.
Don't tell him.
He says it's half order and half begging.
Why not?
It's pathetic.
Regulus says in the exact quiet way Sirius minimizes his own problems. It breaks Remus's heart when Sirius does it. Hearing it from Regulus is a shock to his system. Remus carefully plies Regulus's fingers out of his jumper.
You can just speak to him. You know, you don't have to go around getting hexed to do it.
Regulus snorts.
And when would he find the time between cuddling with Potter and swanning around the hospital wing and you?
Remus closes his eyes and sighs.
I promise you, Regulus, if you asked, he'd find time for you. He misses you.
He threatened to ruin my life over you, you know.
Regulus is back to his even, haughty disinterest. He found his center and ran back to it, and that's all right.
When I gave him his watch, as though I give a damn what sort of person he beds.
Didn't see you running after him last Yule.
Comes James's voice from the corner.
Prongs.
Remus warns. James's job is to guard the door and look intimidating. Remus wants Regulus off balance, not defensive.
He loves me.
I have eyes, I can see that.
Regulus tugs on his robes, smoothing them down.
I will say, since we're on the topic of hurting Sirius, if you hurt him, Lupin, I'll kill you myself. There won't be a clandestine talking to. I mightn't even give you a chance to make it right. You'll drop where you stand.
And that, Remus knows, is the purest form of Black family love there is. A death threat.
I'd let you.
He says because it's what Regulus needs to hear and because it's true, anyway.
Just talk to him, Regulus. He's going to start throwing hexes at every upper year Slytherin if you keep getting hurt.
I'll consider it.
Regulus spins back to the door and points threateningly at James.
Unlock the door,
he demands. James looks over at Remus, who nods, and James breaks the locking charms with a few muttered counterspells. He steps away and opens the door, sweeping an arm in front of him with a little bow. Regulus stops in front of him on the way out. He mutters something under his breath, and James smirks at him as he disappears out into the dungeon. Remus finally lets himself relax. He's got an answer, or at least some of it. He's just not sure what he's supposed to do with it yet. Chapter 4, Sirius. Sirius's Oxford College of Magical Studies application arrives by owl with little fanfare 4 weeks before the spring term ends. He knows it's coming. He sent away for it. McGonagall told him to get it early and get started. and that's what he's done. Still, he's shocked when the owl lands in front of him with an envelope thicker than any he's ever seen. It's due in November. He's got months to get it done. Still, he feels anxious opening the envelope, and even more anxious seeing the parchment packet. Requirements upon requirements. He considers for a moment putting it in his trunk and forgetting about it forever, throwing it in the lake, maybe lighting it on fire.
Oh, it's here.
Remus says as he comes up to the Gryffindor table.
That looks intense.
Sirius gulps in a breath. He wants to throw up.
It's here.
10 candidates a year for the healing program.
Remus shoots him a crooked grin. He swoops down and kisses Sirius's cheek.
You're going to be one of them in 78, Padfoot.
He splays a hand over the cover sheet, his palm covering the crest in the center of the page.
I don't know.
He says,
Maybe I should just do Mungo's.
No.
Remus settles next to him on the bench and pulls the packet out from under Sirius's hand.
You want to do this. You're absolutely smart enough to do this. You can apply to Mungo's too, if it will make you feel less anxious. But I'm not letting you worry yourself out of something you want.
Remus flips the front page, and Sirius can barely bear to look, but he does. Mr. Sirius Black in black ink is enough to make him look away.
Have they already rejected me before I even apply?
He asks, sounding pathetic even to his own ears.
Stop, Padfoot.
Remus says. He's reading, worrying his lip the same way he does when he's working through a difficult piece of theory in transfigs. Sirius groans and hides his head in his arms.
I'm never getting another ambition in my life.
Mooney doesn't have a comment on that, so Sirius peeks up through his curls. He's gotten a quill from somewhere and is making notes on the back of the envelope, lips still sucked into his mouth. Sirius's heart feels so full he thinks it'll burst.
500 galleons a term.
Remus gasps out.
Oh,
Sirius sits up and peers at the parchment.
that's less than I thought.
He thinks Remus's head might explode, so he leans against his arm.
Less.
Remus echoes, stunned.
Much, if I'm honest.
He turns his face into Mooney's robe and presses a kiss against his arm.
Hogwarts is almost as much.
Hogwarts doesn't cost hardly anything.
Sirius laughs.
Hogwarts doesn't cost you hardly anything. It costs me 400 galleons a term, which I was bitterly reminded of every time I went back to Grimmauld. All those galleons to be a huge disappointment.
Remus stills under him.
You've been paying more than my mum makes in a year in tuition.
Someone has to keep McGonagall in tea and biscuits.
Sirius straightens up.
Orion was the one paying, not me. I suppose Dad took over my account when I ran away. I probably would have gotten on a scholarship if he didn't. McGonagall wouldn't have thrown me out into the streets.
Remus's lips curl up into a fond smile, but he still looks thrown.
No, she wouldn't have.
Dumbledore might have.
Sirius sighs.
I'm not getting a recommendation from him.
Remus taps the envelope.
You need 7.
He says,
Pomfrey, Sprout, Flitwick, Fowler, and McGonagall.
Sirius ticks off on his fingers.
Sluggy, maybe.
Remus snorts at that and shakes his head.
Don't ask Slughorn for favours, Sirius. 15 years from now, he'll be knocking on the door asking for payback.
That's a valid point, Sirius thinks, and he reconsiders.
Vector, I guess, although she'll mention my disciplinary record.
He says,
Is Pince an option? Do you think they'd consider a librarian?
I'm still on the summary of requirements. I haven't gotten to the details.
Remus taps the packet.
I'm glad you gave yourself time. This is a lot of work.
Regulus slides onto the other side of the bench, craning his head over a pile of bacon to look at the packet.
Is that an Oxmag application?
Sirius resists the urge to throw a muffin at Regulus's head.
Yes.
He says short. Regulus shoots him a funny look.
Who for Prefect Lupin going for Professor?
He cranes back over the bacon to read upside down.
For me, you sodding idiot, so I can complete my healing education, and I won't have wasted 2 years of Pomfrey's life.
Sirius gives in and lobs the muffin at him, but Regulus is a seeker. He catches it without even looking away from the packet and drops it onto the plate in front of him.
I hardly think the 12 hours a week your play-acting healer constitutes any significant part of her life.
Regulus says in that scathing, haughty way that makes Sirius's eye twitch.
I'm not play acting, I'm apprenticing, you twerpy little fucker.
Sirius picks up another muffin, aiming for Regulus's head again, but Regulus summons it out of his hand.
Stop throwing food at me, you aren't a child.
Going to tell Walburga on me?
Regulus raises an eyebrow, smug and awful looking.
I'd have to be speaking to Mother to run and tell tales to her.
Sirius stops cold in the middle of reaching for a third muffin.
What?
Regulus sets his summoned muffin down on the plate next to the one Sirius threw at him and rips off a bite-sized chunk. He eats it neatly, still watching Sirius's face, still looking smug. He swallows. Sirius waits, but his patience is limited.
There's never enough crumble on top.
Regulus complains.
Creature understands the crumble to muffin ratio. He should come give lessons to the kitchen elves.
You aren't speaking to Walburga.
Sirius demands. Regulus rolls his eyes.
Would it kill you to call her mother?
Yes.
Sirius snaps, pointing threateningly at him.
And more importantly, she isn't mine anymore. Euphemia Potter is. I've seen the tapestry for proof. Walburga, Reg, what's going on with Walburga?
Regulus eats another bite of his muffin. There's more people coming in now, and they're running out of time in the precious first hour of breakfast, where cross-house chatter is tolerated at Gryffindor. Someone's going to comment on the snake in the grass soon, but Sirius is too curious now to not know what's going on.
After your engagement dinner, which, by the way, doing it on Mother's birthday, Sirius. Not very Gryffindor of you at all.
Regulus shoots him a significant look.
I didn't pick the date, Mum and Dad did.
Sirius grouses. He considers escalating to throwing cutlery. He should have never told Regulus about his sorting misadventures. That was a dumb mistake made by an 11-year-old who thought his brother was going to be his best friend forever.
You could have asked to go on the Saturday if you didn't want to needle Mother.
He chides.
Either way, after spending her entire birthday dinner watching your engagement party, instead of enjoying the beef Wellington, Mother dragged me back to the house and tried to shriek the whole place down. She accused me of sleeping with Lupin, which is absurd, and then of sleeping with the both of you, which was a delight.
He eats another bite of his muffin, but Sirius doesn't know how. He may never eat again at the thought of it.
That's...
Remus starts, high and shrill and horrified.
Absurd, yes.
Regulus says, waving off Remus.
I've been seeing Lucy Greengrass. You needn't worry your little Welsh head about me asking you for a ménage à trois.
I was going to go with disgusting, actually.
Remus says, looking between them. He looks a little green around the gills.
If you think my concern was that you're already seeing someone, I don't even know where to begin.
Forgive me, Lupin, but you aren't my type.
Remus stares at him, wide-eyed.
Me? What about Sirius?
Regulus waggles his eyebrows.
He's joking.
Sirius promises Remus.
It's hilarious if your great-great-grandparents are the same on both sides. Don't fall for it.
Regulus waves a hand in the air.
I am, she wasn't, as far as I could tell from the shouting. Grandfather Arcturus was summoned. There was quite a lot of yelling. The crystal bust in the front room was utterly powder by the time she was done raging. I got dropped back at Hogwarts a week early from break, and I haven't heard from her since. I'm sure the summer is going to be a treat.
You don't have to go home.
Sirius points out.
You can go to Chateau d'Emeraude for the summer. Grandfather might torture unicorns or whatever he gets up to out there, but he won't accuse you of sleeping with me.
Regulus snorts.
Father wouldn't stand for that. He's still speaking to me. And besides, Grandfather will just rant about you for 2 months. I'd rather not be reminded that I'm still very much the spare, according to Grandfather, brother.
He should take that one up with his daughter-in-law then, since she disowned me.
Sirius mimics a blasting curse with his hand, thinking of the tapestry in Grimmauld Place.
Doesn't matter. She hasn't owled you at all since break.
Not a word. It's been lovely and silent, and I've been able to cavort with my Ravenclaw without her pushing Priscilla Parkinson and Violetta Yaxley down my throat.
Mooney thought Greengrass was an apt match for me.
Sirius says.
He was doing pure blood matchmaking for me before he moved on to just doing me himself.
Regulus crinkles his nose.
Crude, brother, returning to the point. Oxmag, for healing.
Sirius nods at him and peers over Remus's shoulder at the packet. Newt results of an A or lower will not be considered, he reads, and doubt starts to creep in.
I think you'll be the first Black since Phineas Nigellus to not be a philanthropist or a politician.
Andromeda's a bookkeeper.
Regulus scoffs.
Andromeda's a tonks.
He says.
And I'm a Potter.
Regulus reaches over and taps the edge of the packet.
This says Sirius Black. It says it right there. It doesn't say Sirius Potter.
He shakes his head and moves to stand.
But speaking of Potters, let yours know I'm still thinking about him and the myriad of hilarious ways I can make him pay back his life debt.
He'll go to the grave never having paid you back.
Sirius says.
You'll lord it over him until it's too late.
Regulus smirks at him and picks up the remains of his muffin.
You know me too well, brother.
He takes off down the aisle toward the Slytherin table, leaving them alone with the packet. Now that Sirius's distraction is gone, though, He's got nothing to focus on but blind panic and 100 pages of parchment to sort through. This is going to be torture. He makes it 3 days before he breaks, anxiety and doubt creeping over him, and goes running to McGonagall. He's been good. Since he stopped in to talk to her about his engagement at the end of April, he hasn't seen her outside of classes. He feels like less of a bother to her. And this doesn't feel like a personal failure, like all of April had. Instead, it feels like an academic one, which is a new and exciting kind of failure for Sirius to feel. He knocks on her door on Tuesday before dinner, when he knows she'll be in there. He hopes she's not with someone else. Her actual office hours are usually on Tuesday. Not that he's paid attention to that posting in the common room for years, but he doubts it's changed. The door opens under his fist and he peers inside. She's alone, writing furiously on a sheet of parchment.
Professor, am I interrupting?
You never are, Sirius, you know that.
She pauses and looks up at him, eyes searching his face. He hopes she doesn't see any sadness there. He doesn't feel depressed, just anxious and out of his comfort zone, which is an odd feeling to have about academics after 6 years of fighting James for top of the year. He steps into the room, clutching the Oxmag application packet to his chest, and kicks the door closed behind him.
I don't think I can do this,
he says.
Nonsense.
She answers, holding out her hand. He passes it to her.
I haven't had a Gryffindor apply for Oxmag in 2 decades, and I've already bragged on you, Black. Don't make me a liar.
He shrugs awkwardly, stuffing his hands in his pockets for lack of anything else to do with them. She flips through faster than Mooney had on Sunday.
You can do all of this. I'm certain you're capable of listing the courses you've taken at Hogwarts. You know your own name and birth date. I'm also certain you can either skip the scholarship section entirely or send it off to your solicitor. 3 essays. You've written me 2 feet on complex topics over breakfast. Don't try and tell me I'm wrong either. I can see you from the head table.
Well, that's hardly the point. I can write you a treatise on Gamp's law right now if you'd like, but a personal hardship. Professor, I'm a Black.
She levels an incredulous look at him.
How would you define the fall term of last year?
A nightmare.
It comes out harsher than he means it to, but he does mean it.
That's not a hardship. I haven't struggled or...
All of those things help when he feels that cloak of darkness come over him. He can't stop it happening, though, and that feels like failure, bitter on his tongue every time he has to open his eyes and say, "It's not a good one today, Mooney." But what's that compared to real suffering? Poor little rich boy, with his broomstick worth hundreds of galleons and his record collection and his manor house with 9 bedrooms and a sprawling formal wing the Potters don't even use. Sometimes he's sad. She looks up at him, and her eyes are soft, her smile more melancholy than it should be. He hates when she looks at him like that, like he's a lost little lamb to be saved.
Sirius, I assure you, if you write about what you've overcome, it will count. I know it's hard for you to discuss, but you've been disowned. What's that, other than hardship?
It's not as though I slept under a bridge. Rosewood House is an upgrade.
McGonagall shoots him a small half-smile.
Monty's a good man and a good father to you. Effie's a loving mum. Just because you found a family doesn't discount the pain of losing one. That doesn't mean it was easy. I know it wasn't. We've spoken about how difficult a transition it was, if you recall.
He doesn't remember much about the specifics of most of his post-incident Thursdays. He cried a lot, and often, and he told McGonagall things he wouldn't ever tell anyone other than Remus. Sometimes things just tumbled out of his mouth before his brain could catch up. He wasn't well. Sirius is sure he cried to her at least once about how hard it was to adjust to life with the Potters, to not look for cover from exploded glassware every time voices got raised, to not be afraid to tell Monty no when he didn't want to do something. He doesn't remember what he said, but he's sure it was something. None of that is anything he wants to share with a stranger. It's why, when asked, he said he would rather speak to McGonagall than a professional at St. Mungo's. The thought of Giles Pettigrew and his colleagues reading about Sirius's personal life makes him vaguely ill. They're small problems compared to other people's, and Sirius would know, since his fiancée has real hardship.
It doesn't feel important,
he admits. Clarity matters. She asks that of him, for him to explain what he means when they talk about how he feels.
And I don't want to share those things with people I don't trust either way.
He pauses and takes a deep breath.
It's fine. I'll find something that's pathetic enough to pass muster if I must. But I'm feeling very anxious about the whole process. Specifically, the recommendations.
He bites down on his lip and looks up at her from the spot on her rug he'd been staring at.
I haven't been a model student.
Don't minimize your problems because other people have it worse.
She says it's an order.
And no, Sirius. If I'm being honest, if you came to me and told me you needed an Oxmag recommendation 2 years ago, I would have told you no. But you've spent the last 2 terms proving to me that you're serious about this.
She pauses, lip twitching, and he groans.
Not you too. James thinks that's the funniest joke ever told.
She waves him off.
You've shown the staff that you want this. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a professor who would say no.
Vector.
He mutters. He gives in and flops down into the red wingback chair by her desk.
Professor Vector speaks highly of you.
She tells him, being gentle in a way she saves for when he comes to her shaking.
Which I know you know. Perhaps Professor Clarity would balk. You didn't take divination very seriously, you know.
Rubbish subject. I only took it because I thought Remus was going to take it to coast through something.
He sighs.
Should have taken Muggle studies.
Which is also a coast. If I'd know you had an interest in animagery.
She glares at him and he has the decency to look contrite.
Regardless of your motives as to why, I would have offered you an independent study elective.
My motives.
She narrows her eyes at him.
I'm aware that for some of you, the full moon knitting circle is more than just knowing.
He gulps down some air and tries to keep a poker face on. She gives him her most severe glare, and he feels as though this might actually be grounds to get him in hot water. So he does actually shrink a little in his seat.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
He tries.
I'm sure.
She deadpans.
That isn't my point, today at least. We'll discuss that another time.
Well, if he's not getting shouted at for it, she can't be too upset. And another time could also be never, if he tries hard enough. Maybe after they leave school next year, before he gets on the Hogwarts Express for the last time, he'll corner her and tell her the 36 things he's sure she'd have expelled him for, one of which is definitely spending full moon nights with Remus.
We've rather strayed from the topic,
he says, trying redirection over trickery. McGonagall can see right through him a lot of the time. Lying to her only works a third as often as it used to before he spilled nearly all his secrets to her.
Your application.
She leans forward toward him.
Would you prefer if I ask the staff to write them?
That's a coward's move, and he knows it. He also knows that she worries about him almost as much as Mum does, who's only surpassed by King Warrior Remus Lupin. He must look petrified if she's offering this.
I can do it,
he says.
I just don't want to waste everyone's time when they're probably going to take one look at my last name and reject me.
She actually rolls her eyes.
Sirius, you understand your name will do nothing but increase your chances, don't you?
The Blacks are awful,
he says.
The Blacks are powerful.
She slides the packet back to him.
And, failing that, Giles Pettigrew will put in a word for you.
I'd prefer to not have to rely on nepotism,
he says, taking it back and shoving it into his book bag.
I want to get in on merit.
And I have faith that you will.
She picks up her quill again, which means the topic is closed. He knows he isn't dismissed. He's allowed to sit there for as long as he wants or needs. If he wants to open the topic again, he's free to. She'll listen. He does take a moment, thinking about things he can and can't say in an essay about himself. The other 2 topics will be easier. He can talk about his academic achievement for days. He's the youngest ever animagus on the registry, after all. He wishes he had a choice of subject matter, but he supposes that if it were easy, everyone would try for Oxmag. He cranes forward to spy on her writing. She doesn't stop him from it. She's working on what looks like the start of a syllabus for a history of magic class. Not one he's ever taken, since this course starts in the early 1800s, based on her neat script. They've never covered anything after 1751, the year Binns woke up dead.
You haven't stopped by in a while,
she observes, not looking up from her writing.
I haven't had a reason. Missing me, Professor.
He can't help the grin that spreads across his face. Getting McGonagall to like him might be the greatest personal victory of his life. She smiles down at her parchment, small and almost secret.
I finished the Scottish breakfast, you know. Swapped it for Darjeeling, and then suddenly you've got no need to speak to me.
He perks up.
Well, if you'd like, I can tell you about my May over tea.
She flicks her wand with her offhand, a difficult but neat trick, one that Sirius uses all the time to impress the lower years. And a teacup appears in front of him, steam rising off the tea inside it. He carefully picks it up and sniffs, still grinning. McGonagall sets her quill back down on its rest and focuses all of her attention on him. That used to make him nervous last year. It doesn't anymore. He's gotten used to people caring. He takes a careful sip and then a breath.
Well,
He starts. He's there for a long time. Chapter 5, Regulus. Forgetting that Lupin had half a brain in his head was a mistake. Regulus realizes this now. Too late to stop Lupin from figuring out that Regulus has the shaky start of a great plan. But he'll adapt. He's got to. The strawberries were probably a bridge too far. He hasn't been fretted over by Sirius in a long time. He forgot how wide and deep his protective streak is. So he goes to Plan D, harass Sirius at breakfast. And that works a treat, even though it makes the Slytherins angry and the Gryffindors nervous. He wonders, when he slides onto the bench across from Sirius and Lupin on Friday morning, if they're nervous because he's sitting there or if it's because they're reminded of where Sirius comes from. He doesn't go every day, although he wants to, because there's appearances to keep up at Slytherin. Lucy deserves his attention as well. She's a lovely, laughing thing that he'd like to keep. He thinks he may love her, although it's still too early to properly tell. He won't let himself feel it until he gets Father to forget the trail of broken matches, Sirius left behind, and remember that Regulus doesn't need a Parkinson or a Yaxley to keep him in line or remind him that he's an heir of the House of Black. He's lost one dear thing already. He won't set himself up for losing another if Franklin Greengrass and Father can't come to an agreement. Regulus will get his one lost thing back, he thinks, watching Sirius across the table. He's sleepy, eyes drooping, and his whole body's half leaned against Lupin as though his lover is the only thing keeping him awake.
Long night.
He asks. Sirius flicks his eyes toward him.
late night.
He corrects.
McGonagall got to me, so I've started my application. They want my whole life story.
Regulus frowns, reaching for a goblet that fills with pumpkin juice as he closes his fingers around it.
I'm shocked they're making you apply. You're a Black. They should be honoured that you even want to go.
Now you're being ridiculous.
Sirius says. He angles his head up and kisses Lupin's jaw, then straightens, reaching for the bowl of oatmeal in front of him.
Hardly. If Great Aunt Hestia knew you were thinking of going, you'd already be admitted.
That gets Lupin's attention.
Your aunt works there.
No,
Sirius says.
I haven't got a great Aunt Hestia because I've been disowned.
Grandfather's sister-in-law is on the board.
Regulus says to Lupin, shooting Sirius a glare.
Hestia Macmillan.
Lupin looks between them, frowning.
Well, given everything that's happened, maybe it's for the best that Sirius doesn't rely on that and goes a more traditional route.
Which is ridiculous. Grandfather's favorite grandchild is still Sirius, despite Mother's blasting him off her tapestry and Father sealing off his bedroom. Regulus nearly snorts.
The more traditional routes of risking not getting in at all. What if there's a herd of Ravenclaws trying for Healer next year?
There's only 15 Ravenclaws to worry about, and they aren't all even going for Oxmag, never mind the healing program.
Sirius says.
Besides, some of them are nutty, and I've got better marks than all of them.
There's 16 Ravenclaws.
Regulus says, glaring hard at him.
One just got lost.
Sirius flips him 2 fingers.
Oh, is it Caro? He's always got his head in a book.
Sirius.
No, not Caro. Dark arts books might be books, but that's got Salazar written all over it. Snivelous.
Sirius.
I'm not a boring, stupid Ravenclaw. Don't accuse me of that.
Sirius shoves his spoon angrily into his oatmeal. Regulus leans forward, meeting his eyes.
I'd never call you boring.
He says, holding Sirius's gaze.
But if you'd met Gladstone Rook on the train instead of James Potter, you'd be 2 tables over in blue and bronze, which you well know, because you told me yourself.
Sirius turns red high on his cheeks.
Shut up about it, you prick.
He mutters, shoving a spoonful of oatmeal into his mouth.
The hat was wrong.
His words come out garbled. Regulus makes a face at him.
Don't talk with your mouth full, you sound like a peasant.
He scolds.
The hat reads minds.
Sirius brandishes the spoon at him, in what Regulus is sure is an attempt to be threatening. It fails.
What would you know? It barely got on your head before it started shouting. Practically said Slytherin in Parseltongue. You're such a perfect fit.
I've never bothered to fight with my destiny.
Regulus says.
You've always been pig-headed about yours.
I don't believe in it.
Sirius tells him, trying to sound lofty around another mouthful of oatmeal.
I'll make my own, thank you.
Hat stalls aren't that uncommon.
Lupin says diplomatically.
You've got one in your year, bilge flower.
Regulus actually does laugh then.
You've told them it was a hat stall.
Shut up,
Sirius warns.
don't you?
Gryffindor was a demand, not an option.
Regulus says, ignoring Sirius.
Grandfather used to call him our little eaglet when we were children. He got a Rowena Ravenclaw biography as a 10th birthday gift, which he asked for in preparation for breaking a generations-long Slytherin streak. Even Mother knew it was coming.
Lupin's staring at him with raised eyebrows and a half-opened mouth, shock coloring his features. Regulus is actually surprised Sirius hasn't shared this with him. Lupin isn't Regulus's opponent for Sirius's fraternal affection, but if Lupin doesn't know, Potter certainly doesn't. That's a point to Regulus in this game he's playing. Sirius drops his spoon into the bowl with a clatter.
She's interesting,
He protests.
unlike her students who are boring and not me.
Regulus narrows his eyes at him.
Name another Gryffindor who's got even a passing interest in ancient Egyptian casting circles, and I'll never speak of it again.
Sirius tosses an annoyed look his way.
Remus, done. Never speak of it again.
Regulus glances at Lupin.
Do you have an interest in them? Because he can't shut up about them.
Lupin looks away, biting his lip.
That's what I thought.
Regulus says, turning back to Sirius.
Lupin doesn't count. You've infected him.
Oh, look at the time.
Sirius pushes his oatmeal bowl away from him and starts to scramble up from the bench.
I have to go to potions.
Regulus shakes his head.
The morning block doesn't start for another hour. Running away from me. Cowardly Sirius. Godric wouldn't approve.
Sirius freezes, seems to consider what he said, and then throws himself back down on the bench with his arms crossed.
All right, so the hat thought I'd do all right in Ravenclaw, but I shot it down, which means I'm an obstinate arse, which according to you is pure Gryffindor.
Too right.
Regulus agrees.
You've got me there.
He sees Potter and Pettigrew coming out of the corner of his eye, which means his time is up. He stands up from the table, taking his goblet with him and walking with his head held high across the hall towards Slytherin. He can stand Lupin. He doesn't extend the same grace to Sirius's friends. Regulus always figured he'd be friends with Sirius's future wife. It isn't hard for him to transmute that onto Lupin, who will make a good black spouse despite his bloodline. Regulus spent months watching them, furiously angry at Lupin for causing Sirius to leave home, and he found no motive but mutual devotion. The same thing certainly couldn't be said for any of the matches Father tried to make, who were all in love with the idea of being a black but ambivalent about Sirius himself. Always the odd duck, his brother. Before he absconded to Godric's Hollow, Father was forever furious about how hard it was to find him a match. Sirius never liked any of them. There was always something. Stupid hair, he'd said about Lottie Crabbe. Dumb as rocks, about Gertrude Bulstrode. Can't hold a conversation about Violetta Yaxley, which that one, Regulus knows from his own failed introduction dinner, is absolutely true. He never suspected Sirius favored men, but he supposes that explains Sirius's attitude toward Father's matchmaking, and his preteen infatuation with that scandalous book that posited Salazar, Slytherin was Godric Gryffindor's scorned lover. He half wishes Sirius had just said something. Father would have found him a husband and a fitting surrogate when the time came for children. There wasn't any need for the dramatics of last Yule. Regulus glances back at the Gryffindors as he settles between Caro and Rook, though he supposes this was inevitable, given the look he spies on Sirius's face. That besotted grin and those gentle eyes, those were only for Lupin. Salazar knows what's so special about him, but there's something there that led his brother to throw everything away. Well, almost everything, and maybe when Regulus eventually gets his way, nearly nothing at all. On the night Regulus Black stood accused of the crime of hugging his brother, his mother's 52nd birthday, Grandfather Arcturus answered Regulus's frantic flu call and apparated to Grimmauld Place before the words were fully out of Regulus's mouth. He popped into existence in the front room like a thunderclap, a dark swirl of fury, and stood between Regulus and Walburga, wand brandished.
Control your wife.
He snarled at Orion.
You've lost me one grandchild already to her madness. I'll kill her myself if she tries for the set.
The secret truth of Grimmauld Place has always been that no one can control Walburga Black, least of all Orion. That night, Regulus found himself standing behind Grandfather, watching Father cower at both of them, and he knew in his heart of hearts that his father would never be strong enough to hold the family together. He was a coward, they need someone brave. Regulus receives a summons to Chateau d'Emeraude 3 days before owls begin. Grandfather has rotten timing. He thinks to himself as he tosses Rosmerta a sickle for using her flu. He's knee-deep in studying, but instead, he has to go have clandestine meetings with his grandfather, who couldn't wait 3 weeks until the Hogwarts Express brought him home. At least Chateau d'Emeraude comes with a very good wine cellar. Grandfather Arcturus doesn't care if he drinks his way through it when he visits. He doesn't visit often because grandfather has always favored Sirius over him, which annoyed him when he was young and grates on him now that he's older. Grandfather Pollux likes him. He probably won't for much longer, not when it inevitably comes out that he's reunited with Sirius. What's worse is Regulus knows he's been pulled out of school in the middle of owl preparations to sit with grandfather and gossip about Sirius. On Mother's birthday, the night Mother lost what was left of her mind and accused him of incest, grandfather came and pulled him out of the madness amid the bursting glass and mad howling, and then spent the rest of the evening alternating between interrogating him about how Sirius was doing and griping loudly about how he'd gone and fallen in love with a mudblood. It's going to be more of the same, but he can't ignore a summons from his grandfather, not when he's going to have to deal with the politics of acknowledging Sirius. Grandfather will be perhaps his only ally. Grandfather's waiting for him in the drawing room. Yanni, his elf, offers Regulus a bow and a glass of red, which he takes. He raises the glass to grandfather and takes a long sip.
I was studying,
He says when he swallows.
owls begin on Monday.
You don't need to study. Your father is a weak-willed, feckless milksop, but he managed to find you a governess who properly prepared you for Hogwarts.
Grandfather says.
You were ready for owls when you received your letter.
Regulus takes a seat on the sofa by the fire, across from grandfather's favorite armchair. He has a moment, a flash of a memory of Sirius sitting here, 10 years old with a book in his lap, and one of grandfather's crups curled up on his feet.
I see tempers haven't cooled while I've been in Scotland.
Regulus says.
And they never shall again.
Grandfather takes a seat in the armchair across from him.
If I were as vindictive as Pollux, he'd be begging for gold in the streets instead of lording over them from my house.
Regulus raises his eyebrows and says nothing, opting for another sip of wine to stop himself asking where this passion was when Sirius was driven away from them. He knows the answer.
How goes your fruitless quest?
Grandfather asks him after a long silence.
He's well.
He's well. He's gotten it in his head to become a healer. He's applying to Oxford. Aunt Hestia should be told.
Grandfather nods.
I'll inform her. She'll be pleased.
I expect he'll be heading a department at St. Mungo's within the decade.
Regulus says. It's nice to brag on his brother a bit, even if it's only to grandfather. He doesn't get to speak about Sirius to anyone but Potter, which is ridiculous, and not at all the life he imagined for himself.
He's apprenticed to the matron. He's competent already. The younger students call him Healer Black.
Grandfather seems to almost swell with pride.
He's always been clever.
He's had a ring made for Lupin from Potter Gold.
Regulus hates this. Sirius should have asked him, not Fleamont.
His muggle.
Grandfather sighs and sinks back into his chair.
Lupin, you say?
Wizard father.
Regulus tells him, nodding.
Christian. Young blood from what I can tell. I haven't asked. Muggle mother.
You know nothing of the family.
Welsh.
Regulus offers.
I can't help but notice you've stopped calling him a mudblood.
Grandfather juts out his chin.
I'm preparing for the inevitable future.
He says,
1,500 years of unbroken purity of blood, Regulus. What's so special about this muggle?
Regulus privately thinks of Andromeda and Isla, blasted from the daughter tapestry at Grimmauld Place, and the dozen withered branches stretching back through the long reach of the mother tapestry here in Chateau d'Emeraude. They prune the impurities, but they still exist, passing on curling black hair and gray eyes and magic so deep and strong it itches to break free. Sirius isn't the first. He's just the first heir.
He loves him. They're quite devoted to each other.
Regulus tells him.
We've been speaking. I've broken through to him, I think. He's been calling me brother again.
Something sparks in Arcturus's eyes.
He called you brother.
Regulus nods.
Little brother, even.
He swallows the rest of his wine and looks up at grandfather, a wild thought sparking in the back of his head.
He's still on there, isn't he?
He asks.
I'm the thing keeping him hanging on.
No.
Grandfather says. He glances back behind himself toward the door to the tapestry room.
You aren't the only thing.
Regulus takes a second fill of wine from Yanni and a moment to gather his thoughts. If grandfather still claims him, there's hope yet.
When father dies, I'll restore him.
He drinks to steel himself, because this might get him thrown out into the streets.
I don't care about the muggle, grandfather.
I find I care less than I should.
Grandfather admits.
He's never fit the mold, despite all of our attempts to force him to fit.
They fall silent again, the two of them in the drawing room of the crown jewel of the Black family holdings, the manor house that was supposed to eventually be Sirius's home when he married. Orion doesn't like the countryside. Sirius hates the city. It was never in question that Orion would wither and die in Grimold Place, then pass it to Regulus, and Sirius would take Chateau d'Emeraude.
Perhaps we don't wait for my sorry excuse of a son to expire.
Grandfather suggests. He meets Regulus's gaze and holds it for long enough that Regulus nearly blinks.
You'd lose your claim if we do this.
I never had one, not if he's still there.
Regulus says, gesturing with his free hand to the looming doorway behind grandfather.
I was born a second son. I'm content with my birthright.
Then we take him back.
Grandfather says.
One hitch in that plan.
Regulus sets his wine glass down on the side table.
2, really.
The muggle will be an annoyance, not a hitch.
Grandfather leans forward and meets Regulus's eyes again. There's certainty there.
I can bring the family in line.
Regulus inclines his head in agreement, even though he very much doesn't think grandfather could manage it. Cousin Bellatrix alone will light the world on fire rather than see a mudblood in the House of Black, and that's to say nothing of the rest of them.
I'm sure you can, but getting Sirius to agree will be difficult. He's fond of the Potters. He's appeared on their tapestry, or so he says.
He's fond of you,
Grandfather points out.
And yet he left me too last Yule.
He sighs.
I tried to hate him. It didn't work.
Nor did it for me.
Grandfather says to him kinder than grandfather ever had been.
Get him back, Regulus. Bring him home. I'll deal with the politics.
He won't leave Lupin.
Regulus warns him.
I've been watching. They'll be married. A stain on the house the others won't stand for.
I'll deal with the politics,
he repeats.
He belongs with us, with his muggle or without.
Regulus lifts his glass. This is a conspiracy now. He feels like a traitor and a spy, although he's not sure to whom.
To our once and future king?
He says, and drains his wine a second time. Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic, composed by Burning Aurora, Caliana, and Flowerhawk.